Welcome to our final session today for Track 2. Glad you guys are still here with us. I think you're going to be really interested in this next topic because it's something that we all struggle with every day, how to collect the right type at the right time. With us today is Billie Johnson. She's the Vice President of Client Results at Incept, and she's also from Ohio. So today we have two people speaking to us from Ohio, which I think is kind of cool. She is a 20-year veteran of conversational marketing and strengthening relationships between blood donors and blood centers. Billie has provided more than 40 blood centers with strategic guidance, consulting services, and outsourced call center support. She serves on the board of the Incept Gives Charitable Fund, the American Red Cross Chapter Bash Board, the ADRP Communications Committee. She's a member of PACE, ADRP, Vistage International, and AABB. So please help me in welcoming Billie.
Good afternoon. Thank you to everybody who decided to stick around and not enjoy the glorious day. I walked over and was certainly surprised and impressed with the weather out there. Thanks, Marie and Pascal, for all of your work coordinating and inviting me out. This is a presentation I've not given before, so bear with me as we go through it. I do like for my presentations to be very interactive, so please don't hesitate to raise your hand, ask a question, and let's talk through some of the concepts that I am going to be talking about today, because I think they are a little bit different than maybe some things that you've seen in the past. For those of you who do not know myself or Incept, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Incept is a conversational marketing firm. We specialize in having productive conversations with blood donors and have been doing so since 1998. We've developed successful strategies for some of the nation's most successful blood centers through consulting, through co-sourcing, and through collaboration. We use a lot of different conversation tools, and that includes direct mail, email, web chat, SMS, text messaging, as well as inbound and outbound call center services. To tell you a little bit about myself, I am a wife, married for 22 years to a saint, mom of 2 boys. My oldest son just moved out, so if I tear up in the middle of this, you'll know why. He is on his own officially with his first apartment. I am an aunt to 13 nieces and nephews, 3 great nieces and nephews. Animal lover. I have 2 dogs and a cat and a grand dog. Grand puppy actually, 8 weeks old, 9 weeks old now. Philanthropist, I do a lot of charity work. A lot of that was fostered by my involvement in the nonprofit industry, but also by our owner, who spends the majority of his time now that he is semi-retired giving back to our local community, and has been a huge influence. Business leader, strategist. I'm a blood banker at heart. You'll probably see as I talk through, I talk a lot more like a blood bank employee than necessarily a call center employee. I am a live music junkie. I go to somewhere between 10 and 12 concerts a year. It doesn't really matter the genre. And I would be remiss if I didn't explain that I am the clumsiest person on earth as well. This was a door bump letting one of my puppies out and severed a tendon. So yeah, it doesn't hurt, don't feel bad, it's just embarrassing. So today we are going to talk about change. I did a presentation at ADRP a couple weeks ago, and I said, you know, there was a point in our industry where we would say one day, you know, collect as much as you can possibly collect, call every donor, just collect, collect, collect. And now it seems like what we need to do changes on a daily and weekly basis. And what we really need is more of what we don't have and less of what we do have. So that's my tagline for this presentation, is how do we get more of what we don't have and less of what we do have. By the nodding heads, it feels like a lot of you are faced with that same challenge. So hopefully I can give you some food for thought today, and we can talk through how to get the right product at the right time, and not by doing so just by following some of the old marketing practices that we've always done. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit is some generational differences. The Gen Yers and the Gen Xers are not responding to our requests the way the millennials and the baby boomers have in the past. We all know there's a generational difference, and we all think, like, how do we get them in the door? But we're not really focused in on, what those differences are. So I wanted to give you just some background information on Gen Yers and Gen Xers and what makes them tick. This is the what's in it for me generation, more so than we've ever seen before. I heard a speaker last month use just a simple sentence, and for whatever reason this sentence really resonated with me. He was talking about something that was going on in the news to his 20-something-year-old child and said, did you see this happened? And they said, no. And he said, well, don't you read the newspaper? And the kid said, well, no, if it's important, it'll find me. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's exactly what we're dealing with, right? If it's important, it is important. What we're doing is important, so we have to find them. That's why there are subscription services like the Skim. Has anybody ever heard of the Skim? It's delivering headlines to email boxes every day. Most of our Gen Yers and Gen Xers get their news from Facebook. I hate to even admit that I'm in that category, but I am. And I subscribe to everything from CNN to TMZ. And that's kind of how I know what's going on. And I usually know it really fast. So we've got a lot of generational differences going on, but some of our traditional methods of just asking or appealing to the altruistic nature of our baby boomers isn't going to work. I've been asked, do you think that Gen Yers and Gen Xers are not as altruistic, or do you feel like they're heartless or they don't have feelings? And I don't think that's the case at all. I think they just think different. They are multitasking and so connected at all times to whatever's going on in their life. They have got a smartphone in their hand, and they are Facebooking and Snapchatting and Instagramming and checking their email and doing homework all at the same time. And somewhere we're trying to slide in there and ask them to do what we need them to do. And so and now we're getting very specific, because for the most part what we want them to do takes about an hour and a half longer than anything we've asked them to do in the past. So we have to really compete for the manicures and the pedicures and even the time they're spending at Starbucks or whatever it is that they deem a priority for their schedule that week. Any questions so far?
I have a question. What do you mean by now it takes an hour and a half?
Well, one of the things about getting the right product at the right time is moving the donors to automation. And that's kind of the direction we're moving with a lot of what we have on the shelves is really what we don't need. So that's a good segue, actually. One of the things we use a lot in our organization is cascading metrics. It's a little bit of a buzzword, but the general idea behind cascading metrics is you take your overall organizational goal and you break it down to the absolute smallest component. You can do that. In our case, we're going to do it today by ABO, but you can also do it by employee, so that your newest, greenest employee knows exactly what their goal is and how they're contributing. The idea is that each level feeds the level above it until you organizationally are successful. So for our example today, we're going to have a pretend blood center whose organizational goal is 100,000. I'm going to stop at 100,000 and say you can use units, components, donors, whatever word you want to use, just use it all the way throughout. For the purposes of our illustration, I'm going to use donors, because if I try to get into components per procedure and all of that, it'll get way too confusing. So we're going to talk just in terms of donors. So to go through the breakdown of cascading metrics for our pretend blood center, the organizational goal is 100,000. We're a 50-50 center. So we're going to ask our donor centers to drive in 50% of that, and our mobile collections to drive in 50%. Then we're going to look at automation, and we're going to break that down to get our donor goal that we need for whole blood versus automation. We're going to carry this tree out using that 45,000 number a little bit further. Take that 45,000 annual number, let's break that out per month, per week, per day. Once you get to a per day number, we're going to look at it by blood type. These are pretty statistically sound based on population makeup. I'm sure we would all like to quadruple the ONAG and half the APOS. But again, this is illustration purposes only, just to kind of get everyone to start thinking about a per day by blood type goal that you can use in your blood center and what the difference that would make for you. It doesn't make much if you know it today because you can't really impact who's walking in the door, but the idea behind this is for us to get proactive in our recruitment efforts. So once you know your goal by blood type, then you look at your inventory by blood type. The numbers really don't mean anything for the purposes of our illustration, but what they do show is that we can get down pretty granular when we know what we're looking for in terms of our inventory. A lot of us know our goals at the organizational level, but once we know our goal by blood type, for us at Incept, we have clients that send us a flat file that is a CSV file that tells us their inventory by blood type so that we can import that file and compare it with the schedules in the CRM system so that we get a pipeline look at what is happening and what the blood center needs. To give you an idea of what that looks like, hopefully you can see this okay. I know it got a little bit small. But this is really the key to getting really successful at collecting by blood type and knowing when to convert and when you've got the right products on the shelf. So the first column is the goal that we talked about when we broke down our original organizational goal by blood type. Second column is the actual, what we actually have on the shelves. And then the pipeline days out, this is used from the CRM system. Whatever you're using, there are a ton of them out there, but you can start looking at your appointments that are scheduled days out. You can apply your show rates. You can apply your deferral rates to get to a number of units forecasted that is way more accurate than traditionally in the past. We have always looked at what does our donor center typically do the first Tuesday of May in the past. Last year's stats aren't helping us this year because we are really different. As an organization, our blood centers are very, very different. And our donors are behaving very different. So if we use our schedule, we can actually get very accurate on what we're forecasting. So what this tells us, if we look down, say at APOS, we see obviously we have more on the shelves than we need. We used a formula to look out in the next 7 days. Yellow means we're on target. So you know today how many appointments you should have you should have 5 days from now or 6 days from now based on your show rate, so you can begin to adjust your emails, adjust your SMS messages, adjust your calling based on what's coming in so that you can make more proactive decisions. For 19 of the 20 years I've been in this industry, we've gotten phone calls that said, we have too much APOS, can you stop calling APOS? And you just shut it completely off. And then inevitably, a week and a half later, we get the phone call that says, oh my gosh, we're on appeal. We need to turn everything back on and go as hard as you can. And really, the idea behind pipeline reporting and getting this forecast as scientific as we possibly can is to get you out in front of those numbers so that you're no longer reacting to inventory in that way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions? All right. So this, yes?
Yeah, question. So the pipeline days out, this is what's coming, you expect to be coming in?
Yes. So you take your appointments that are in eDonor, Mediware, any of the Hematera, and you apply your show rate and your deferral percentage, and that will tell you what you have coming in.
So don't you need to apply what's going out during the same period?
Good question. So we use that in the goal setting. So when we're setting up the goal, and we're still working through, I think there are different ways to look at this based on the blood center, but when you're looking at developing what your goal is, you can do that a couple of different ways, but using demand is the easiest way to look at what your forecasted distribution is to establish your daily goal. And the daily goals may be different based on days of the week. It isn't unheard of to ship more one day than another or something like that. So yeah, this is kind of to get your wheels turning, but we are using distribution in the goal portion. Was there another question back there? No? Okay, I thought I saw a hand. So once you have an idea of what the next week looks like or a couple of weeks looks like, you can really begin to refine your marketing efforts so that you're not really just going as hard as you can. And the way to do that is through your channel marketing. SMS, I have these in this order because this is least expensive to most expensive, and we want to be as mindful of our dollars as we can possibly be. So SMS or text messaging is really the least expensive option we have for recruiting donors. It doesn't yield a terribly high percentage of donors, but is becoming increasingly popular and imperative with our younger donors. And when I say younger, I'm really talking that 18 to literally now, I mean, the line keeps moving, but we're up into the 45 to 47 range where people are now responding to text messages more than necessarily email or phone calls. The best thing about SMS text messaging is it can really boost your show rates. So when you're looking at that pipeline report, let's see if I can go back. When you're looking at your pipeline report and you see that you are potentially behind schedule on where you feel you should be 5 or 6 days from now on your BPOS, you can very specifically go after your BPOS donors that already have an appointment and send an SMS reminder to boost your show rate. SMS reminders increase show rates by about 17%. So statistically speaking, that's if you're not using them on all donors and you want to use them very strategically, using them that way is a good way to get more of the blood types that you're in need of. Email also low response. Response to email is on the decline. I think we're getting inundated with the number of non-work related emails. Most everyone has a separate email now that they give out for things they just don't want to look at. And we need to not be in that bucket. But most of, especially since they're free, most of the generations that we're targeting, they have a Gmail account that they give out every time they go into a store or make a purchase or go online, and that's the email that they give out to non-important issues that they look at every now and then. And so while it is a low-cost recruitment tool, we're seeing declines on the responsiveness. However, they do see it. They may not respond to it, but they see it. They'll go in. I watch my oldest son. He goes in and he literally will scroll through his Gmail. And even though he may not click on something or he may not schedule, or he sees exactly who he's getting emails from. So for me, email is a great advertisement that supports some of our other efforts. It's, this is all a recipe. There's no silver bullet to recruitment, and email is an important part of that. Last is telerecruitment. I tend to get a little windy on this one because it is the one that I use the most of, but the big part of using telerecruitment with this methodology is that you can throttle your call lists based on your inventory so that you're not over-calling on the segments you don't need. And it can all be done automated without an inventory report coming out at 8 a.m. and then you walking down to the telerecruitment department to tell them to shut blood types off. Or take this blood type and move it over to a double red cell conversion, or take this blood type and move it to a platelet or a plasma conversion. All of this can be done automated through telerecruitment, and just getting that inventory report in an importable format, lining it up with your goals, and then having a process set up that says, okay, if ONEG is greater than or equal to this, then do this to the file, and you can throttle how many of those call records are going to your lists each day that will organically help even out your inventory. We do this all the way through all of the conversion types that we call for, not just on the whole blood side, even though that's the example that we're using today. But we'll look and we'll say, if an APOS number gets to this level, move it from a whole blood to a platelet donation, and if it gets to this number, decrease the list by 50%, and if it gets to this number, decrease the list by 80%, all to try and seamlessly get the stress off of everyone's plate and even out the inventory. Any questions on this slide? I mean, I know the slide itself doesn't have a whole lot there, but. So once you know kind of what you're shooting for, and the channels that you're going to use, and even though text and email you're doing a little bit of reacting to, when you've got your telerecruitment lists kind of throttled, a big part of knowing how to speak to your donors comes in predictive modeling. We use predictive analytics in a number of ways. I'm going to touch on a couple of them today. Cell and text responders. So if you're consistently doing cell calling or texting, you'll begin to know who responds and how. Marie and I were just talking about a lot of our younger generational kids don't even set their voicemail box up on their cell phones anymore. You'll call and it says, you know, the party you were trying to reach has not set up their mailbox. And it's because they really don't, if it's important, it'll come to them. So they're not, you know, they're not in a spot they can answer your call, and so they expect you to call back. So know who responds to text messaging. Follow your messages going out, and then what responses you're getting in, so you can put these attributes on your records. Same with email responders. If you've got them, this is such an inexpensive way to recruit donors. So if you have a bucket of donors that are responding to email, flag them so that you're corresponding with them through email. And then phone responders. This one's probably the most complicated, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking through how we do predictive modeling for appointments and do not calls, because those are both really important factors in our tele-recruitment departments. So a big thing that we started noticing is that 80% of the phone calls that we make generate 0 units. Right? All of our units come from about 20% of the phone calls we're making. It's the same 80-20 rule that we hear about in just about every avenue of business, but we started really digging in and saying, how do we not call the 80% that don't want to be called? And we came up with an algorithm, if you will, for predictive modeling. What we do is we take and we look at the donors that we've called in the past and what their response to the phone call has been. So they were an appointment, they were a may walk in, they were a self-deferral over the phone, or they were a no. And then we carried that out and we looked at their donation history after that phone call to find out, regardless of what they told us on the phone, what was the behavior that happened after that phone call. And we created 9 different categories. The categories go like this. I'll use bucket as the terminology. So bucket 1s are donors who always schedule an appointment and always honor that appointment. Bucket 2, always say they may walk in, always show up, but just never really commit. Bucket 3, always tell us they have the sniffles, always donate. Bucket 4, always tell us no, but always show up. Bucket 5 is a new, just entering our database. So we don't have a clear line of sight as to how to market to them. And then you go to bucket 6. Bucket 6 are donors who always schedule an appointment and never show up. Bucket 7, always say they may walk in, never show up. 8, always self-defer over the phone, never show up. 9, always tell us no, never show up. Once we got to that information, and it's not as absolute as that, because maybe someone said yes 3 out of 4 times and said no out of 1, and so we used a numerical grading system to really assign points and get levels on these donors. But once we were able to do that, we were able to say bucket 9 is by far the largest bucket that we're all dealing with. Why, if they have said no and not come in the last 12 calls, why do we think that the 13th call is the magic call? It's not that we can afford to stop marketing to them. We really can't. We need them. We just have to find a different way to market to them. And then out of this grew scripting logic. We were able to take our call scripts and gear them towards the donor's behavior. So just as a couple examples, bucket 1s always say yes and they always show up. These are our best donors, our gold donors. They really don't need long, drawn-out discussions about the need for blood. They get it. They want you to be respectful of their time, tell them what's going on, get them scheduled, and get them off the phone. So we have a very short appeal for bucket 1s. Bucket 2s, the may walk-ins, and then always show up, we use a more direct approach that says, I know the last few times we've called you, your schedule's been crazy, and we haven't been able to get you booked. Let's work together and find a time that it works for you, because it's really important for us and our staff to know who's coming in. And we, somewhat passive aggressively, but we acknowledge the behavior without calling them out or making them feel like we're being condescending. The ones that always say yes and never come in, that's the one you have to tread really, really lightly. But we will actually say, I know the last few times we've called and scheduled your appointment, you haven't been able to make it. Let's work together to find a time that's convenient. And literally by just the light acknowledgement of the past behavior, they go, oh, they're onto my shtick, right? They know that if they schedule an appointment, we're not going to call them again for a while. So that light acknowledgement really allows us to convert those donors and get them into bucket ones. Bucket nines, the ones that always say no and never come in, really take some work, but you have to continue to massage that bucket, otherwise you're not going to make more bucket ones, right? So we have to get those donors in, and using a variety of email and postcards. One of the most successful campaigns that we have done in the last probably year was handwritten notes. So we have 350 call center agents who sit and devote their time to recruiting blood donors. We had them use their time, instead of making phone calls, handwriting notes to donors, encouraging them to come in or go online. And the response was great. I don't think it is forever. I think they're not used to getting handwritten notes because no one handwrites anything anymore. So it was a really great strategically placed boost that allowed us to get some donors in. But we've had great luck using that for those non-responders, as well as the donors that are on our do not call list. Which takes me to the next part of predictive modeling by behavior. We spent a ton of time trying to look at the behaviors of a do not call and how to predict a do not call to further preserve our donor base. We are not getting the number of new donors in that we are actually shoveling out on do not call lists, and it's important that we have more new donors coming in than the number going out. So using the data that we have, we were able to decide, now you have to be able to put all of your touch points together to be able to do this, but we were able to look and say, how many times does a donor not pick up their phone, not open an email, not respond to a postcard before they DNC? Okay, how many times do they pick up the phone and have a conversation with us, as well as an email, as well as a postcard? So all the different combinations to begin to predict what does a do not call look like, and how do we stop 2 steps before that and address them differently so that we don't get them to opt out of the call lists. Any questions on predictive modeling? So you can see when you start to add in the pipeline reporting with the predictive modeling and some of the inventory integration, we can start to look out further ahead. We can begin to tailor our scripts to the donor's behavior to increase our results there, but also by ABO so that we're targeting the right blood types, because believe it or not, the next level of predictive modeling is taking those 9 buckets and breaking it down by blood type to see if they truly behave differently. I think there's a lot of really fun things out there that tell us what our blood type says about our personality and how we respond and things like that, and we're about to find out if any of that is true when it comes to recruiting donors. But for right now, using predictive modeling to set up your scripts and really predict what your donors' behaviors are going to be is the key when you're trying to get very precise on what you're recruiting and when, and time is precious. You know, if we can reduce the number of hours we're spending recruiting and put them somewhere else, it's a cost savings in the long run for all of us. Hot topic. Are t-shirts and giveaways rewards or incentives? Does anybody have opinions on whether they're rewards or incentives? Yeah? Anybody want to share?
They are incentives and donors like them.
I think they're a reward. It's a nice thank you, but I don't think t-shirt's going to drive a donor's behavior to donate.
I think there's different types of donors.
How about the Gen Ys and Gen Xers, the 18 to 40 somethings? No. It's an I don't have the answer, just so everybody knows.
I say it depends on the t-shirt.
I agree. I agree. It's a long discussion that we could spend hours on whether or not it's a reward versus an incentive. I think there are, in a lot of cases, Marie, you're right. It's a thank you gift. I have seen some very successful promotions that get people to come in the door. I don't know that a t-shirt gets you to come in the door. It's a great thank you and they want it. You know, we've had some enjoy books, if you guys know what those are. Those are always like the coupon books. Those are huge, very expensive. Sports related drives are always a big incentive that do tend to get people to come out. So my purpose in this is really just to make us think what we're spending our money on and what is it achieving? Is it really working to get our donors in the door, or is it a nice way to say thank you? I think both are needed. I don't think there are enough things that we can do to thank our donors, so I'm not advocating for one side or the other. But what I do want you to think about is if we could strategically get them to think a little bit different, if we could change the methodology and the thought process and make our processes lean more towards incentives rather than rewards, I think we can go a long way. How many of you have a loyalty program or some sort of donor points recognition? Okay, just about everybody. So this is kind of my philosophy on how you can use your points to incent a donor versus reward a donor. So 100 points if you make and honor an appointment. So this is especially important when we're talking about our pipeline reporting. You'll see here in a minute, we're going to talk a little bit more about bedside rescheduling, but if we make appointments important, our donors will too. And I think for years we've gone the opposite direction, and you don't have to have an appointment to donate, and you certainly don't, but let's incent them to do so in a way that works for us, because when donors have appointments, then we can see what's coming in the future, we can apply our show rates, and we know what we need to do for tomorrow. 200 points if you give the procedure we ask you to. It is more important today than ever that our donors move to automation. And it's, I have one blood center who has done away with their schedule. There's no more whole blood slots versus automated slots. There are slots. And when you come in, we're going to ask you, the collection staff is going to ask you to do what we need. And we've worked really hard to get the messaging on the phone to line up with that, so that when they go in, it's what do you need from me today, as opposed to us calling and saying, what I really need from you next week is a 2-hour commitment. So 200 points, if you walk in and we need your whole blood and we say, I'm gonna give you 200 points and get you out here in 45 minutes, that's a really happy donor. It's also a happy donor if you say, I'm gonna give you 200 points if you can spend an extra hour with us today because we're really in need of platelets, and explain the process, explain their blood type. 50 bonus points if you reschedule your next appointment before you leave. I would like to make that one 400, and any of you that are cost conscious should make that one 400. I get told a lot of times that collection staff can't be customer service staff. They're not salespeople. They're a different type of person, so forth and so on. But again, they're scheduling today. In this case, for our example purposes, they're scheduling for 56 days from now. What a pipeline do we have if we're looking 2 months out? And if we can really get this working to where 40% of your appointments are getting booked 56 days in advance, then you have a great forward-looking methodology to begin making proactive decisions instead of reactive decisions. And that is the whole mission behind this presentation today, is to help us get more proactive. So there are 3 sources of where your donors come from in a donor center. I preach a lot about this one. And is anybody in marketing? Okay, good. Because they don't like me when I start talking about this. There are 3 sources where appointments come from on the donor center side. If you go on to the mobile side, these same 3 sources apply, but we'll add our sponsors to that. But when you're really looking at units by source, these are the areas. Telerecruitment. In general, telerecruitment is responsible for about 31% of the organization's overall goals. However, when you go just to the donor center side, it moves up to about 45% of the donor center collections. Bedside rescheduling should be about 40% of your overall collections. and donor self-scheduling, which I hold our marketing department accountable for those. It really is only about 10%. But they are the ones, they are scheduling emails, they are sending postcards. Those all have a call to action. And we tend to say, what was the success of that email campaign? Not necessarily, did you hit your goal of how many donors you're scheduled to bring in this month? So very effective donor center strategy that we've been using is getting all of these folks on a weekly call, and everyone has to report. Where are you in terms of your goal? And what are you going to do to get there if you're not on pace? And holding the marketing department and the collections staff accountable for recruiting donors, A, drives your costs down incredibly, and B, gets you forward-looking reporting and the ability to see what's coming, because all of those donor self-schedules are going to be in the future. Is anybody doing this currently? You are? How is it working?
Some of our techs will schedule for the whole year.
For the whole year?
Yep. They have donors that they put the schedule in for the whole year.
That's
Because
amazing.
they're regular platelet donors, so every month they have them.
That's great. That's great. Anybody doing it on the whole blood side yet?
Yeah, we have some donors, but some of the donors do it themselves.
They do.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Anybody else doing anything close? Does anybody have a decent bedside rescheduling process or program that they are willing to share? Yeah.
Some of our donors get upset when we schedule them for the whole year. Some of them get
Sure.
upset when we schedule them.
I think that goes to the I think that is a really valid point, especially when we're talking about these younger Gen Yers and Gen Xers. I don't know what I'm doing in 6 months. I'm probably on a plane somewhere and in that sort of thing. So yeah, I can see why maybe a whole year out is not ideal, but certainly asking them to. I have one donor center that has an 80% reschedule rate. It's not normal, it's not even human, but they have an 80% reschedule rate at bedside. They have developed a customer service sales process where the screener, after they get all the way through, talks to them about their blood type, gives them a pamphlet on what procedure is best for their blood type, and asks them to schedule their next appointment. If the donor says yes, they write it on the card and they paperclip it to their little folder. If the donor says no, there's no card. Takes them out, sits them in the bed, and then the phlebotomist goes in for round 2, a second request if they didn't schedule an appointment. And they're having tremendous success, and they're using a very minimal amount. I mean, as a call center, it's almost blasphemy for me to say annoying telemarketing, but it's annoying telemarketing. I mean, I would love to help blood centers operate their strategy as opposed to their call center reactive strategy. And if you can increase your bedside recruitment, you're that much further ahead. Is anybody holding their marketing department accountable for appointments self-scheduled by a donor online? Anybody have opinions about the idea? I talked about this at ADRP, and I had some marketing people in the audience that kind of jumped up and they were like, wait a minute. And I'm like, well, you know, you're a channel. Every email you send has a call. Click here to schedule your appointment now. We're just not holding them accountable for the end result of that. We may be looking at the number of clicks and talking about the success of that email.
Well, you know, we look at Google Analytics, and we're looking at number of clicks, throughs, and how many clicks. So we do look at that, so we can measure each campaign to see the success. You know, how many people opened the email, or how many people then made it to a unique landing page, and how many people ultimately made an appointment. So we're working on that.
That's step one. You have to get them to the website. You know, it's a different way of thinking when you start telling your marketing department that they're responsible for end units. But at the end of the day, as we get very specific on our marketing efforts, and we're emailing based on blood type, and we're targeting different donor groups to do what we need them to do, cascading metrics only works if everyone knows what their goal is and how they're impacted by it. So if your marketing department thinks that their goal is just to send 10,000 emails each month, not necessarily to get in 10% of your donors. It's a, it'll be a tough struggle. And maybe you start lightly by just introducing the number and just comparing and not necessarily holding them accountable, but then working your way up towards getting them to be accountable for the results of, or the end output of their marketing campaigns. Some are hard. I think we all know, like radio and TV are really hard to judge. But those, I think, are like, they're like salt in a recipe. Everything else works when the salt's added. And, some of those other marketing techniques that we use are, we see the benefits of TV and radio when you make a telephone call or send a postcard or an email. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I'd like to know, how, do you have the success rate for a blood center who don't have a recruitment center or recruitment personnel to do like daily, calling?
So no telerecruitment at all?
Yeah. How do you get the more patients to come in if your other staff, like the phlebotomy is drawing the blood, calling patients, then trying to keep up recruitment, because then you realize, like, you look at your schedule planning here, like you said, you realize, oh, 3 weeks from now we don't have anybody scheduled because we don't have a recruitment person to stay
Sure.
on top of that, because you got blood drive, you're doing your apheresis, you're doing your therapeutic, now you got to do recruitment in between.
Wow.
How do you handle that? Then you become reactive instead of proactive, because if you're proactive, you're stay ahead, or has somebody take care of that situation.
Sure.
Now you're in a panic if you don't have nobody scheduled.
Yeah, that's a really tough, I guess, so besides telerecruitment, bedside recruitment, and donor self-schedule, there's a fourth category, and that's your walk-ins. I respectfully call walk-ins the failed attempt at all of our marketing efforts because we didn't get them to schedule any of those touch points. For you guys, I guess you have bedside recruitment, donor self-scheduling, and walk-ins, and you really have to make the most of that if you're not going to dedicate resources to calling them. Bedside rescheduling is probably your best bet. I have found the best processes to go through with a collection staff to try and train them how to do bedside rescheduling is to literally make an SOP out of it. They're very good at following SOPs, so if you have a detailed sales plan that walks them through exactly how to talk to a donor, how to explain the blood type, how to get them on the schedule, that's probably going to be your biggest area for getting schedules in advance.
We usually do that, so that's not an issue for us. We know how to get the patients to come back. However, you need to get new, fresh people back.
You do.
So the telemarketer, don't you need a blood center to be successful? So the telemarketer for new, fresh people, new marketing or something?
You almost never want to use telerecruitment for cold calling. It's incredibly expensive, especially in your area. I have.
But telemarketer, but shouldn't they have a recruitment in your department for a blood service? You should have somebody managing the phone, trying to get something in, because
Sure.
when we not here, when we on blood drives, how you gonna be able to make phone calls? You got 2 times a week. You can't do everything and be successful.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like you're really resource challenged.
No, I'm just saying, because the bedside is not the issue. We are trained to make them, we know how to recruit our patients. We can recruit our patients up for like 5 to 10
Mhm.
That's not the issue. The issue is, when you got off a blood drive, them days, 2 or 3 days that week, you might not be there, so you lost people, you lost recruitment time, you lost your revenue.
Right.
What's the revenue?
Absolutely.
That's the truth. Lost the revenue.
I would say there's a cost-benefit analysis for you to do that would show what the benefit is to having someone in place that's responsible for recruitment. A lot of our centers are moving back to, and this is an old practice that I was an advocate for years of getting rid of, and now I'm advocating for kind of the reimmersion of the donor site reps. Somebody that's on site, they've been called receptionist, secretary, field reps, they have a ton of names, but that person that's there whose job is really to talk to the donor about bringing a friend, who, you know, makes some phone calls, calls tomorrow's donors as a reminder and says, if there's anybody else that you can bring along with you, please do. You know, and kind of maybe with one person or one FTE and a good cost-benefit analysis, you'd be able to convince your executive team to let you have someone to at least, you know, try and increase the number of new donors that you're seeing, because you're in a tough spot. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Well, with us, we do the same thing, we're just 2 different campuses, but we have a volunteer that comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays with me. But then like Monday, Wednesday, the days that she's not there, we have to call her and say, who else is there to call? And she's already called me, we know, like.
So you said you call in twice the same people?
Yeah, like, we asked to call, and it's like, who else do we call when we have a volunteer that comes in twice a week who's called 150, 200 people annually, you know?
Yeah.
So much calling that you can do, and, you know?
Volunteers are a great resource. I've not seen a ton of success using them in traditional tele-recruitment, but they are great for reminder calls, thank you calls. I love a post-donation thank you the next day to a donor, just to say thanks and make sure that they feel good, they know how special they are, they know how much we appreciate them, and then you get a little bit of post-donation information. And volunteers are great for that. But it sounds like maybe you need to find a way to get a 5-day-a-week volunteer, or somebody that can work a little bit each day, as opposed to, you know, having those peaks and valleys, because that's going to really adjust your inventory as well. When some days you're getting reminder calls and some days they're not, and that sort of thing, that can have a pretty significant impact. Any other questions?
I have an answer to this beautiful young lady's queries. Don't bother collecting some blood here, get it all from your
Now, see, that was impressive. I withheld my "you should find a call center to call your donors" comment, but you opened the door, so. Good deal. Well, that about wraps it up, everybody. For just to recap, you know, what I'm encouraging you to do is take a look at your organizational goals and break them down as small as you can by blood type. Compare that with your current inventory. Use your schedule and show rates to forecast accurately. Try to get away from what the donor said on this day last year, or what the donor center did, what they historically do on Tuesdays. Use your channels wisely and least cost first. Really think about the channels that you've got, what is open to you, what the true cost per unit. Get to a cost per unit and use them least cost first. Predictive modeling will allow you for precise inventory balance. This is the 9 buckets. I know it's a little bit hard to do if you don't have a ton of IT resources at your beck and call, but you can train your staff to look at a donor's profile or history to get close. We, in the beginning, had just some flow charts, and they work. Stop rewarding and start incenting. Really think about what is going to get the donor to do what you need them to do, not just walk in the door. Because what we need them to do is really deliver the right product today. So we need to focus our incentives more on getting them to do the right product, not just walk in the door. And be proactive. Try to get away from reacting to today's inventory or Monday morning's inventory report, so forth and so on. Any other questions? Yes?
I don't know where this fits in, but I'd like to know if you know if there's a relationship between philanthropic sort of plan giving sort of application as compared to blood donors, because you're either giving blood or not.
You know, that's the one history I have with this is a pretty strong correlation. So in certain markets, we have done a lot of cold calling, where the donor base doesn't support the goals, or there's a new center that opens up. And through Info USA, we purchase literally like cold call lists. They're like phone book listings. And it's a miserable phone call if you can only imagine what it's like to call someone and ask them to donate blood for the first time with an organization they've likely never heard of. But we found there is a flag that is charitable giving, and that means that that person made a monetary contribution to a health-related charity. So it's the donors of the American Cancer Society or the American Heart Association, or they give to monetarily give to charitable organizations, and that list, albeit very small, it's a very small segment, will outperform just a generic list by about 8 times. So depending on your area, that is an option. But so from my perspective in getting a donor, getting a monetary donor to move over to a blood donor, yes, it is about 8 times more likely through the phone. I don't know how it would be through mail or any of the other channels. Any other questions? Fabulous. Well, I'm getting you guys out a little bit early. We're about 30 minutes ahead of schedule. I will be around here for a little while if anyone has any questions. Thank you so much for coming today. Thanks. I didn't touch it. I didn't touch it.